Hi, my name is Rachel Saunders, and welcome to the Lavender and Steel podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure of chatting with Caroline Litman, who is an ex-NHS psychiatrist, mother of Alice Litman, who sadly took her own life, and author of Her Name is Alice, which was published last year and is a memoir of Caroline's experiences with Alice and having to deal with her grief about this. So, welcome to the show. Would you like to tell the listeners more about yourself and where things are currently with you? In particular, let's start with your most recent meeting with Wes Streeting. How do you feel that went?
Oh, goodness. Not great. I mean, I didn't punch him, so that's good. I was offered a meeting. I'd written to him several times asking for meetings, and he repeatedly ignored me. And then I copied one of my letters into Keir Starmer's office, and it was only after that that the Department of Health got in touch with me. So I was offered a 45-minute meeting, and I actually ended up talking to him for nearly 2 hours. So I was told that that was a good sign, that he was, curious and listening. But it has since become very apparent that he wasn't taking anything that I said on board at all, because he's issued a statement this week saying that the Department of Health is looking after the health of children and reducing their risks from taking medicines that are unsafe and unproven. So he's talking about puberty blockers and sex hormones for trans children. And I'm just livid. Yeah, so we talked for ages. I was gaslit. Yeah, I was dismissed. I was patronized. I was they tried to cleave me off as a cis ally and kind of be on their side. They thought I was some sort of conduit to spread their message into the trans community. That was really the overall impression I got, is that they thought somehow that they would be able to manipulate me to do their dirty work for them. And it was really shocking.
I know, and having read through the output that Wes Streeting has since sent into the world, it's really shocking just how little awareness he has about these issues. And the whole cast review itself has got many, many issues. I think least of which is its acknowledgement that trans kids deserve the right to exist on their own terms, that they do have the right to affirm themselves.
Well, the message I got in the meeting was that CAS is the only evidence that the Department of Health is going to listen to, that NHS England is going to listen to, and it's definitive and it's correct and accurate, and it's what they're following. But they're not following it because, like you said, the CAS review didn't recommend a puberty blocker ban. It didn't recommend cessation of sex hormones for trans youth, but the government is doing that anyway. So it just feels like a purely political decision. And they just completely ignore all the other international evidence, particularly the Utah research that came on the back of the Republicans banning transgender healthcare for youth. And it's just a dereliction of duty. It's not, I don't think it's an accident anymore. I just kind of used to think that there was some infiltration in certain areas and he was listening to the wrong people. But now I just think it's deliberate. He does know the facts and he's just ignoring them.
I think that's just the tragic thing about the whole circumstances, because 10 years ago, the NHS brought the puberty blockers trial in place because they could see that it was affirming and it was giving trans kids a chance to live normative adult lives, however you want to frame normativity. And again, there's massive problems in the trans community about using normative assumptions. But being able to prevent harm has always been at the core of trans paediatric healthcare. It's never been about pushing children into something which they're not suitable for. And I think we saw this with Kira Bell. Her court case was all wrapped up in politics. And I know that it's had a profound impact on the conversation.
So I was just going to say, because it was definitely that came over in my meeting with Wes Streeting, is that he's massively preoccupied with detransition. That's his biggest fear, his biggest anxiety, is that we can't risk one single person transitioning who may later decide for whatever reason that they've taken the wrong path. And, to that, my answer to that is, well, then you value Kira Bell, who is alive and living her life, over Alice, who died, and all the other trans children who died. I mean, James Palmer, head of gender services at NHS England, said to me in the meeting, oh, that rise in suicide rates amongst trans youth in 2022 was just a blip. And that is the year my daughter died. Now, she wasn't counted in the numbers because she wasn't under 18. She was 20 when she died. But to say that to a grieving mother in a room, oh, it was just a blip. It wasn't statistically significant. So all I can take from the meeting is that they value a cis life over a trans one.
I agree. And I think this is the broader conversation that you've been a massive advocate for trans people since Alice's tragic passing. I think it's really interesting how you arrived at that position yourself and how your personal advocacy, especially through the book. I had the great privilege and honour of working with Caroline in a small part on the book as getting to read the copy from a trans position. And it was really striking because I was doing my doctorate at the same time. And I had the text, the early draft of the text. I was sitting in a conference and I had to step out of the room every half an hour because I could just feel the emotion pouring through the book. I could feel the emotion that you were putting into it and the rawness that you were bringing through to it. And as a transsensitivity person, it's like I was expecting going into it, going, okay, how much do I need to correct here? And it's like I think I barely made any edits or any suggestions to it. I don't know how it came across in my notes when I was sending them back to you.
I think it was good. I think, I was really pleased. I really had the trans community in mind so much in terms of getting it right and not saying anything, not making any mistakes around the language or around my perceptions or whatever. I didn't really have the trans community in mind as people who were going to read it in great droves because I thought it would be too traumatic and awful, but actually it's been received so well within the trans community, and I just get the most wonderful messages from trans people saying that they feel seen and recognized within its pages. And I mean, that's, if I can borrow the word affirming, it's so affirming for me that I'm kind of getting it right and doing okay, because that's my main aim is to get things right for trans people. But the people I really want to read the book, the people I kind of wrote the book for, the people like me, because I want to change hearts and minds.
If I may say, it's a meditation on grief. It's this quintessence of emotions that you pour yourself out onto the page. And I know it's gone through several edits and drafts, but you can see yourself on that page.
Yeah, I just wrote it. I mean, I wrote it in response to a competition. I just saw an email come into my inbox 4 months after Alice died. And I just thought, I could do that. And I just sat down at my desk. And so it was a stream of consciousness that I sort of sent off to this competition. And then I just, got longlisted, shortlisted and so forth. And it would never have happened if I hadn't seen that email, but it was very raw. So that came in September. So Alice died in late May. And that competition was in September. So it was very early on in my grief journey. So it is really, really visceral and raw. It was very powerful for me to write the book because I'd spent the previous, 4 or 5 years fighting for Alice to get healthcare. Maybe not that long, to be honest. So 3 or 4 years. And just coming across barrier after barrier and difficulty and transphobia in the healthcare system and struggling to get my friends to understand and so forth. And it was so refreshing and I had freedom to just say things my way, and it kind of gave me some power back.
And that power is amazing. Genuinely, I walked into Waterstones the week it was released and seeing it on the shelf and having that tactile copy, it just, I feel proud of you for producing such a really good book. I mean, it's as I said, I'm
really proud of that.
I have a big trans book collection, which I use for my research. And one of the things that's really interesting when we talk about trans lives is there is often you do see that grief mixed with the pleasure of trans people talking about their own experiences, but very rarely, I think you're one of a vanishingly small number of people who's written it from a parental perspective. In fact, I think I can count 2 other biographies by parents of trans people, and it's really interesting how you've taken your experiences both from a negative, neutral and positive perspective and being able to shape the narrative in an honest way. And again, for those who haven't had a chance to read the book, for me, one of the best aspects of the book is it's a full circle, the beginning and the end. The circular nature of the book that's really interesting and draws you in. And as you read through it, you see the past and the present catching up with each other in a heartbreaking way, but also from there's a glimmer of hope at the end of it, pushing through the grief. And again, it's not something that's easy to talk about, and you've done it in a really profound way that's very relatable.
Thank you. I mean, I didn't have any experience or, prior kind of writing knowledge, really. I mean, I had done a couple of creative writing courses, that's a lie, but it just came together. It was just kind of, to say it was easy, it doesn't feel like the right word, because, obviously the subject matter was so difficult and I was grieving. So, I mean, you can tell in the book, how I really wasn't very well, but the writing process just came to me. And I don't really have any more to say about it, about how it ended up that way. But even though right from the outset, the outcome, you know that Alice has died, because that's right at the beginning of the book. I know that when you get to the end and you're getting to the point where she's about to take her own life, that there's this kind of anticipation, this kind of hope that she won't, kind of thing. I know that it has that effect, because it kind of has that effect on me. I feel kind of tense thinking about it. Yeah.
What's come afterwards, what you've done since the book was published, has also been very profound. Not just the meeting with Wes Streeting, but every time you're in the media, you always, if I say you come across as being a lioness, it's meant in the best possible way. You're very protective of both Alice, but also of the trans community, and the way that trans people the way that the media is attacked trans identities, the way that politics has been over the last 4 years has come after trans people in the UK, especially after the Scotland ruling, and the way you've been a champion and an advocate for us, it feels natural. It feels like it's been brought, you've taken that grief and then used it to become that lioness and that fierce champion.
Well, I think part of it has been fueled by, I held quite a lot of shame about how I had fallen for some of the media narrative about trans people. And I think if I wrote the book now, I would be a bit kinder about myself, because having spoken to more trans people who described how their parents reacted when they came out, and speaking to more parents and how they reacted when they found out about their trans child, I don't think my reaction was particularly different to most, really. But it was definitely influenced by the media narrative around the time when Alice was transitioning, which was beginning to get more and more toxic. And I'm furious with myself for falling for it, because I would have thought, that I was always quite a left-wing, kind of liberal sort of person with my psychiatric training, that I should have known better. But I was just so afraid for Alice, and what I had was this very negative concept about what her life would be like as a trans person, and it was something I kind of didn't really want for her, because it was going to be difficult and it was going to be bad. And of course it did turn out to be bad, but I didn't really understand, I didn't really see that there was this whole group of people who were just living their lives and getting on with their lives and being their best selves, authentically trans, unapologetic, thriving. Yeah, like last night I went to Trans Plus History trans comedy gig, and I just immersed myself in the trans community because that's where I feel safe. And I remember going on to Twitter when Alice's inquest had been held. That was what we did. That's how my campaigning kind of started. The family decided that we were going to be like the first family to go public about the death of our trans child and, sibling. I have 2 other children. And when I went on to Twitter to talk about it, I was expecting pushback from the trans community. Yeah, I thought, they're not going to like me. They're going to be angry with me because I didn't affirm Alice immediately and I made a few mistakes and so forth. And I was just blown away by the compassion and the kindness and the of the trans community and how much they embraced me, Rachel, and just, took me under their wing. And it was the same last night up in Soho. It was just, people were pleased to see me and they were thankful and grateful. And it's nice to be appreciated, isn't it? And to feel like I'm getting it right. And I just, I wish Alice had kind of seen that. I kind of thought when she moved to Brighton that that's what she would do. She would sort of enter the LGBTQ plus world down in Brighton. But I think she'd already been so traumatized by what had happened with the GP and the CAMS nurses and so forth that, she'd become more and more anxious and withdrawn. And she wouldn't listen to her mum, because she was a teenager. And I said, why don't you go to this group? Why don't you go to this trans group? Why don't you to that trans group? It's like, oh, go away, mum, It was very frustrating. It was very frustrating.
What was she like as a person?
Yeah, how do I remember her? I talk about her a lot when she was little because she was my third child and she was I really wanted a third child and my husband was happy with the two. We had the boy and the girl, we had the set. And so I had to really pressurize my husband to change his mind. And then he did. And then Alice came along and she was just a delight because everyone would keep saying how much like their dad the other two children were. And then Alice came along and she had all these kind of little things that really connected her deeply to me. And I write about this in the book because I'm adopted. So, I didn't have a biological connection to my family. And then Alice came along and she just did everything that I did. So she was a bottom shuffler, which I did. And she had this little defect in her ear, which I have on the other side. And then when I met my birth mother, not long after Alice, when Alice was about 2 or 3, I searched for my birth family. And my mother, my biological mother, had the same thing, on the same side as Alice. All those sorts of things, just connected me to her. And then I had this way of communicating with her. It was like we didn't have to speak to each other. It's just like I always knew what she wanted and she was so content, so easy, and it was just lovely. And it was just like I'd always sort of, the other two children were quite argumentative and quite difficult, and then Alice came along and it was just like, oh, this is what mothering is supposed to feel like. It's just lovely. I adore my other two children, but when they were little they were a nightmare, and it was just a pleasure. She was just a pleasure. It was kind of when she hit secondary school. So when she was about 11, 12, and she went off to secondary school, she started to get more withdrawn, become anxious. And, we didn't know what it was at the time. There was a bit of social anxiety about the size of the school and the corridors, all the busy, big people. But, with the benefit of hindsight, puberty was approaching, wasn't it? I remember she used to play rugby because her brother played rugby. So she used to play rugby and she stopped playing when she was about 12 when she went to secondary school. And there was a boy in her team who had hit puberty super early and he was 6'2", this lad. He was enormous and Alice was tiny. And they're on the pitch together. I thought, no wonder she didn't want to carry on. Terrified. Anyway, we were close, but it was really difficult to lose that closeness because she closed up and she clammed up. Yeah, I guess she was terrified. She didn't know how to express herself. She'd always been so compliant as well. So it must have felt like a massive thing to turn around and tell your mum, oh, I'm not, there's this big mistake and you don't really know me. Like she was just compliant. She never wanted to rock the boat. So I think that made her, I always say if my other two children had been trans, I'd have just known about it really early. They'd have been one of the ones who would have told me when they were 4. Yeah. But Alice was just always just a bit more reserved and just don't rock the boat. And yeah, it's sad. I wish she would have been able to tell me years before, but maybe she didn't really know. But there's 1 or 2 things that are maybe clues, but you don't see them at the time.
What advice would you give them about giving their children the space to be themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get asked this quite a lot and I never have a really good answer. I think the first thing is to don't create an environment at home where they can't come out in the first place. So Alice's older sister is a lesbian woman and she came out to me when she was 13. And that was easy for her to do. Well, partly because I've said, she did come out to me when she was 4 if she was trans, because she's that sort of person, but also because we lived in a household where, well, she knew it was okay to be gay, that her parents were completely accepting of gay, lesbian people. We got an aunt who's a lesbian and friends, you know, and I don't think we talk transphobic talk around the house, but certainly in the period after, it's a bit complicated, Rachel, you know, because you've read the book, but there was a period after Alice came out to her friend and her sister first that we found out by accident because of a letter from her doctor that got left lying around the kitchen. And we found out and we tried to talk to her about it, and she just wouldn't talk about it. She just clammed up. She just wouldn't be drawn. And there was a period of about 10 months where I kept trying to talk to her about this letter that had said she'd been to see the GP about her gender dysphoria, and the fact that she wouldn't talk to me about it. And I kept trying. And at that point, when it got messy and I was starting to listen to anti-trans stuff on the radio and starting to think, oh, well, if she won't talk to me about it, maybe she doesn't really know, and maybe she's confused, and maybe this and maybe that. And I just really wish with all my heart that I hadn't done that. So you started asking me what would be my advice to parents. So first of all, just don't be a transphobe and just accept that trans people exist and your child might be trans, yeah? Most trans people are born to cis parents, and you've just got to be prepared that you might have a trans child just the same way you might be prepared to have a gay child or a child that's disabled or, you know, whatever, you know, a deaf child or whatever it is, yeah. And then when they tell you that they're trans or they think they're trans or they're not sure, you just give them space to tell you. Don't jump in with lots of questions. Yeah, don't start saying, this is what I did. It's like, how do you know? And when did you first feel like this? And, you know, who have you been listening to online? Yeah, don't challenge them. Just go, okay, do you want to tell me more about that? This is something I can do to help. Yeah, just be curious, but in a center the child. Don't center yourself. I got quite defensive, you know, like I said at the beginning, you know, I don't want my life to be difficult. Can you just not be? Just believe them. Just believe them. Yeah.
I think this is a really, really excellent point, and thank you for raising it, because the whole point of the show is to show normativity and show that actually LGBTQI plus identities are part of a pluralistic society. They're not just this aberration. They're not something which should be treated at arm's length. What advice would you give people who are going through that grief process then, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. I threw myself into my grief, Rachel, as you know. You have to roll with it, I think, you know. So what happened was my husband and I think this is quite common, we just went off on completely different paths. So he was just able, it's not that he was able, it's just that he needed to carry on. So he got back on his bike and he went off to the gym and he just carried on because that's what he needed to do. And I just couldn't do any of those things. Like I cancelled my gym membership and I never got back on my bike, and he would keep encouraging me to do things like that. And lots of therapists would as well, actually, you know, we'll go for a walk and go out for a coffee, do something nice. And I just couldn't, and I just didn't want to. And every time I tried, I just felt worse afterwards. I became very reclusive and I just stayed in the whole time, and I wept on the sofa endlessly. Yeah, and I got very angry, not with Alice, never with Alice, but with other people who couldn't really rise to meet my need. And at the time I felt that he seemed to be on the surface doing so well. I kind of thought I was doing badly. But with the benefit of hindsight, I think you just need to do what you need to do for as long as you need to do it. I was working as a Pilates teacher at the time, so I was self-employed, and I just closed my business, and, you know, we lost all that income, and I've never regained it, but never gone back to that job. But I was lucky that, you know, we were financially secure and we didn't need that. I don't know what you do, you know, if you've got to go to work, maybe it's protective. Maybe having to go to work protects you from that, because you just got to get your head down and get on with it. Or you've got, you know, other children to look after. I know that because I go to bereavement support groups, and, you know, you've got people who've been bereaved the same way that I have. And they've got small children and they have to just get on with it. But I threw myself into swooning on the sofa like some heroine from a Victorian novel. with the vapors. I was broken, Rachel. I was completely broken. I don't know what the advice is. Just one moment at a time. Get help if you need it. I mean, I did have a consultant psychiatrist in my living room at one point. So I think you have to be quite poorly for that to happen in this day and age. That was the story from the book, wasn't it? That's quite funny. If you read it, it's quite funny. It was a disaster. It was someone I used to know. Yeah, someone I used to work with.
It's interesting when we experience grief, because I've been very fortunate in only experiencing it a couple of times, but never to the depths you have. And grief never leaves you. It's not something which you can compartmentalize fully. And I found, and again, part of the reason why I think the book is such an excellent meditation on grief is that you haven't denied it, and every time we talk about it, you're not afraid of it, if that makes sense. You're not afraid of being public with it.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, because I think that's really important. But I've always been like that. Like, I've always worn my heart on my sleeve, and I've always tried to express my emotions, much to the, what's the word? Not disgust, but my mother wasn't like that. She was very contained, and, got to look on the bright side, and, mop up those tears. And I was just never like that. And there was just no other way I could do it. It's just the way I am. I mean, I think it's about when Alice died, it re-triggered so many abandonment issues that I have, because, it's all in the book. I'm an adopted person, and then my father died when I was really little. And then, various kind of things befell me. And when Alice left, it was just like this massive re-traumatization. I mean, it's awful for everybody who loses someone to suicide that way, especially a child, I think. But, it's just dreadful for all of us. But I was particularly vulnerable to this re-traumatization of this abandonment. It's just like she'd left me, and I wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough for my birth mother to keep me. And, it was just, it went to a very deep, dark, lonely place. We're nearly 4 years in, and I'm doing so much better. But it never leaves you. It never leaves you. Just the other day, I went to record a reel, because I'm doing a bit of stuff on Instagram, try and promote the book and try and, raise awareness about trans lives and what the Labour government is doing to you all. And I went to get my paperback book to read out a section, because I actually got a bad review. I got a bad review on Amazon for the first time. It was from a gender critical person who admitted at the beginning, they said, "Oh, Caroline Litman's always asking gender critical people to read her book." So I have. And she gave it 3 stars. So that was really funny, because I thought she couldn't bring herself to be mean about it. But she did specifically pull up on one part of the book that she criticised me for. So I thought, I'll read that part of the book. And I went to my book and I opened it up and I couldn't find it. And I was searching backwards and forwards, and I had to go to like a PDF on my laptop. So it must be here. Where is it? And then I went back to the book, and there were 36 pages missing from the middle of my paperback. And I just lost I'm going to say a rude word. I just fell apart. Wasn't really about the book, was it? It was about loss of control and other people in positions of power getting things wrong and making mistakes, not taking care of me, not taking care of Alice, not taking care of the book. And then I was just back in my intense grief, just like, it's all wrong. Everything's wrong. Everything's against me. What poor Alice? Nobody loved her. Nobody took care of her. Nobody helped her. Just because of this problem with this, turned out to be one book, and it just happened to be the copy that the publisher sent me. Apparently, it happens all the time, but the author doesn't know because it's not their copy. Anyway, sorry, I'm waffling again.
No, I think it's really important. People get to see the texture and nuance, and I feel often this is what's missing from conversation around queer lives, LGBTQI plus lives, is that whenever people do podcasts or shows, often it's usually focused on one specific issue or one specific aspect of somebody's life. And I think with you, because you've got such a textured a nuanced life. You're not just Alice's mum. You're an ex-psychiatrist. You're Caroline, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. That you as a person have got all this texture and nuance about you that isn't just focused on one very tragic part of your life. You've got this life you've built for yourself. You've got your own rich history, and I think that comes across very clearly in the book, that you're not just Alice's mum. You're Caroline. You're the person who's got this nuance.
Well, one review did say, "Oh, the book's all about you and not about Alice," and I was like, "Okay, well, maybe."
You've got this symbiosis between you, and I think this is a lovely part of it, is parents and children are not completely separated out from each other. Children are aspects of their parents, but also parents are aspects of their children. And I think that you do this really nicely, is you show that symbiosis between the two of you. You clearly have a distinction between yourself and Alice, and there's a delineation between it. And it is your book. It is about you as a person, reflecting on Alice as a person.
Yeah, it's like she's not here to tell her side of the story. So I have to be really careful of that, really mindful of that.
Yeah. And I think you do a really great job of it. And you do this in your advocacy as well. You're very careful to show you as a person through your advocacy. The fact you keep that respectful distance between yourself and your other children, you keep that delineation, you allow them to have their voices. And I know this is something which you've been a very strong advocate for, about not in public. You have shown images of you and your other children at fundraising events, but outside of that, where they haven't put themselves in the public eye, you've been very discreet about it. And I think that's something to be lauded, because you understand that your children have got their own private lives as much as you've got your public face as well. I know with all public personas, it's very easy to develop a parasocial relationship with other people, and especially when you're trying to navigate, like you're doing at the moment, promoting a book, is that what you're putting out into the world is a persona, and that persona you're putting out is very carefully curated, because you don't want people to lose sight of the tragedy, but you also are trying to build a better future for the trans community, for yourself, and for British society more broadly. Anyone with a public profile has a private persona.
Okay.
And then you have a public persona that you present to the world. So what you choose to disclose.
Yeah, because I don't think I'm that mindful about what I put out into the world, if I'm honest. I think I just kind of think, oh, I need to talk about this, and I just go there. And I worry about it later. I think I'm a bit unguarded about certain things, about myself. I'm more guarded about my husband and my family, but about myself, I think I can be a bit sort of lacking a filter. And I was talking to a friend about it the other day, Jane from the book, but we kind of feel like if someone asks us a question, we kind of owe them the answer. It's like, and we have to tell our truth instead of being guarded and secretive and keeping bits separate. So the parasocial bit that you're talking about other people's expectation of me, that's interesting to me, because I am finding that a little bit difficult to navigate, because I do get quite a lot of messages from people who have heard me talking, or they've read my book, and it kind of gives them a permission to then reach out to me and tell me all the details of their situation. And I am finding that is something that I need to address, because I feel compelled to talk to them, to send them messages and everything, because they send me really heartfelt messages about their lives. And I feel afraid that if I put a foot wrong, that I could set someone off down a bad path. And it's a responsibility. And it's really, I need to work out how to handle that a bit more.
Do you find, having been an ex-psychiatrist, you've got the training to be aware of that as well, whereas other people might not necessarily have that awareness of the complexities of navigating that?
Yeah, do you know what? I don't think it is my training as a psychiatrist. I think it's just innate intuition in me. So when it comes to my psychiatry, I think it's important to be kind of clear about it. I think a lot of people kind of assume that you have this knowledge of psychology and kind of psychotherapy and psychodynamics, and like understanding human interaction at a very kind of subconscious level or whatever. And actually, if you train to be a psychiatrist in the NHS, it's very medical. You're learning how to diagnose conditions like schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and you're learning how to diagnose them, make sure there's not something organic going on, making sure someone hasn't got a brain tumor or an infection or something else that might be making them behave in a certain way. And then you're treating them with drugs. Yeah. And that's mostly what psychiatry is. And if someone needs some sort of therapy, some CBT or some psychodynamic psychotherapy, something like that, you refer them on to someone else. So the training that I actually got in that kind of psychotherapy, psychodynamic side of things, actually very, very minimal as a psychiatrist. But I just think that I've always been a kind of sort of just intuitive sort of person, and I kind of pick up the undercurrents that other people aren't telling me. I kind of have a sixth sense. Not always, but yeah.
You're somebody who's got a lot of life experience, but you're also very empathic as well. And you balance out your own experiences with, as you've said, other people approaching you. So what now for you then? How do you see yourself going forward? What would you like to come out of all of this?
That's a really good question. I bet someone could give me a job. Oh, goodness, how long is a piece of string? I just think we're going to be here for a really, really long time, Rachel. Yeah, I think this problem with the current government and what they're doing, removing trans healthcare and, trying to limit trans existence in public spaces with, the single sex spaces stuff. That's just going into another realm, isn't it? But it's very, very important. I just think it's not going away anytime soon. So with all of ourselves who are involved in this space, whether you're a trans person or an ally who's working hard to support trans people, you've got to look after yourself and keep yourself strong and sort of protected from the worst of it, so that you've got the energy to keep going, because we're going to be here for a long, long time. And I'm not going to go away. I don't think, maybe I'll have to have some time off just to recover and rest and recuperate and come back for the next challenge. But I just think I'm just going to be here as long as I need to be until my dying breath to advocate for people so that other young people like Alice and all trans people who have moments where they feel that it's just too difficult, so that they don't have to be in that situation anymore, because dignity and respect is what the government keeps espousing. They really don't know what that means. It's just, and you do deserve all that. But yeah. So anyway, what else? I'm going to try and write another book. I'm going to try and write a novel. If I say it out loud on the podcast, then I'm committed.
What would you like to write? If you could write anything, what would you like to write?
I think sometimes I don't have a great imagination, so I will probably just harvest more of my personal experience and write something. You'll definitely be able to see the threads of what my life has been so far. I have a plan to write from kind of imagining myself in like 30 years' time as an old woman looking back on this period of my life. So, but in a fictionalized kind of way. So I don't know if that sounds interesting.
It does. I think I don't know if you've read any of Paris Lee's books at all. Or
I haven't.
So Paris Lee wrote a fictionalized biography of herself, and it got turned into a TV show.
Yeah. I know that it got brilliant reviews and everything. It can be really difficult sometimes for us to watch stuff, it's awful to say it, that has positive representation of trans people. We feel very sad, we feel really broken by it. But it came out at a time when we couldn't have watched it, and now we probably could,
I was going to say the book's really good as well. Paris has got a really deft touch. So if you're looking for a fictionalised biography, it might be worth having a read of what she said. The same with Sean Fay's book as well. She's written a fictionalised biography of herself. And it's really interesting seeing that juxtaposition between the queer self and fiction, and trying to navigate a world where identity is always in flux. And I think some of the great writers have always navigated that. You look back to biographies from the 1920s and 30s, and you have this great body of literature where you can see the writer bringing themselves into their writing, but there's enough fiction there to keep it at a distance. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. The other idea that I had was to write a sort of fictional account of J.K. Rowling. I had a title. It was called The Assassination of J.K. Rowling. And and I was like, oh, I think I might not get that past the HarperCollins lawyers. Yeah.
No. Oh, on that note, Caroline, thank you so much for the talk today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and as always, I wish you the best of luck with everything. I'm sure whatever you choose to write is going to be amazing. Have you got any closing words you'd like to share?
Buy my book. It's terrible. It's so hard to publicize it because it feels like a grift, and that's what gender critical people say. Oh, you're just grifting, you're just benefiting off the back of Alice's death. And it's just like, it's not for that at all. It's because it's changing hearts and minds. And I just get the most amazing messages from young trans people saying, oh, my mum's not dead naming me anymore, and she's not misgendering me anymore because she read your book. And it's just like, wow. Yeah. So even if you don't want to read it yourself, buy it for the transphobe in your life, or not even that, but just the middle-aged woman who, looks a bit like me or my Four Starter or Helen Joyce. But
you're their kryptonite.
Someone asked me last night, do I get any trouble from the gender critical movement people? And I said no, they don't. I think they had a meeting because early on Twitter that I did get a little bit of conversation. I think Maya sent me one message, Joe Phoenix responded to one thing, I think Helen Staniland, and then it all stopped. And I think they had, I imagine them having a little covenant or meeting and saying, I think we should leave Caroline Litman alone because it would be a bad look. I don't know. That's my imagination. It's a bit fanciful, a bit narcissistic of me.
On that note, thank you so much. And I wish you all the best as always.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.